Now available in paperback and e-readers, Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer. Take a trip into the macabre world of goth modeling in the new millennium in this spooktacular Spinsterella story. Pick up your copy of Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, cause we're having us a barbecue. Netflix has abandoned its plans to buy Warner Brothers Discovery. Now, Netflix had offered Warner Brothers Discovery $71 billion to purchase all of the assets of Warner Brothers Discovery so that the streaming giant could have its own movie studio. However, as Netflix was looking to buy Warner Brothers Discovery, Paramount was looking to make a counter offer, and the Ellisons, who own Paramount, were looking to try to scuttle this deal ever since it was announced. And in order to try to scuttle this deal between Netflix and Warner Bros. Discovery, the owners of Paramount, Skydance, have made a counter offer and were looking to offer up $111 billion and looking to offer up stockholders a larger, more profitable share for themselves. And because the owners of Paramount Skydance were looking to make that higher offer, Netflix basically wasn't looking to counter that offer, and eventually Warner Brothers Discovery decided to go and sign with Paramount Skydance. Now, this merger of a deal really isn't complete just yet because it has to go through a whole series of things with antitrust. However, this whole deal, while it may be good for the stockholders in the short term, may not be good for people who consume media in the long term, and it may not be good for the Ellisons as related to them being able to control what they believe is a media empire here in America. Now, in the short term, when it comes down to this deal between Paramount, Skydance, and Warner Brothers Discovery, basically what's happening here is that the Ellisons are looking to try to consolidate control over the media, which companies have been trying to do ever since Bill Clinton signed the Telecom Act of 1996. Now, the Telecom Act of 1996 deregulated American media and made it where one owner was not held back by regulations, which restricted them from being able to buy more than one TV station, radio station, newspaper, or magazine in a local area. And ever since that bill wound up becoming the telecom law, what has happened is many of these corporations have been going out here and acquiring television stations, radio stations, newspapers, and magazines, and have turned the American media from a competitive platform of local companies to basically big six corporations, which are now consolidating even more, to the point where with the consolidation of Fox with Disney and this Paramount Skydance deal, we've gone now to possibly being only three corporations basically controlling most of American media. And that may not be a good deal long term as related to American media, because as people like the Ellisons are thinking that they're going to get complete control over the media, they may have bitten off more than they can chew. Now, when it comes down to this plan to try to control the media, what the Ellisons are thinking is that they are trying to save the entertainment industry from imploding as related to its struggling business. Now, the Ellisons are saying that they wanted to try to save the theater business, which is core for movies and in America, because when it comes down to many productions, most productions basically make their money at the theater, and that's how the business has always been as related to the entertainment business, as related to movies. And because of the high production budgets, many of these films, with their budgets being $200, $300 million these days, the only way to make your money back is not only with the American box office, but also with the international box office. And the Ellison's deal basically was looking to try to allegedly save the box office of theaters, because Netflix basically wanted to buy Warner Brothers Discovery so that, one, they could go out here and have a catalog of Warner Brothers content for their platform, because they originally were paying Warner Brothers for their content, like Friends and many of their superhero movies, to be streamed on Netflix. And if they owned them outright, they wouldn't have to pay them for that media. And they wanted to also have access to a movie studio of their own, as related to the Warner Brothers studio lot. But Netflix, really, this deal wasn't going to really benefit them long term. Again, they would have a lot of assets in the short term, but they were already building their own studio here in New Jersey, so they may have lucked out by Paramount Skydance going out here and scuttling this deal, because they basically are in a place where they have appreciating assets and are not really bogged down with all of the depreciating assets of Warner Brothers Discovery. Now, Warner Brothers Discovery basically has been a company that's been in trouble, I would say, creatively since the days of Superman 2 in 1980. Now, back in 1980, that's where Warner Brothers has been known for its infamous meddling in many of their films, originally again firing Richard Donner, the director who made the successful first Superman movie, replacing him with Richard Lester, and that began a whole pattern of behavior where Warner Brothers studio executives meddled in many of their popular franchises, like their Batman movie and many other films, and that basically made Warner Brothers into its own worst enemy. And as Warner Brothers went through the years, they basically undermined many of their popular franchises, and that's always been a problem with Warner Brothers. They basically would get in their own way, and that really impeded their business. Now, as Warner Brothers went on over the years, as they became their own worst enemy, many of their films started flopping, and like the recent Superman movie underperforming due to studio interference. And Warner Brothers Discovery basically is not the strong studio it once was, and it's basically at a point where, after being sold to AT&T and then being sold to Discovery, it's basically a company that is in decline. And now the Ellisons, who are owning Paramount, another ailing studio, are looking to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery, and the Ellisons are thinking they're going to get more control over American media. But what they may have entered into is going from a burning house into a burning house, and basically acquiring Warner Brothers is a burning house acquiring another burning house, because at the point right now, Paramount Skydance basically is a company that is already bogged down in debt, and Warner Brothers itself is bogged down in debt. And what I see happening here with Warner Brothers Discovery and Paramount is basically this company being bogged down with so much debt that it winds up overwhelming it, similar to what happened with Hostess, the makers of Twinkies and Hostess fruit pies and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle pies. What happened with Hostess was one strike from the unions wound up crippling Hostess, and eventually Hostess went into bankruptcy. Everybody got laid off, and what happened at the end of the day is that Hostesses, when they went bankrupt because the company was no longer solvent, is that they wound up putting all their assets up for sale, and eventually McKee Foods, the makers of Little Debbie, wound up acquiring all of Hostess's assets for pennies of the dollar in bankruptcy court. And that may be the thing that may wind up happening to the Ellisons. Now, the Ellisons, David Ellison and his father, they originally owned Oracle Computer Company, and these two computer nerds, they know computers and technology, but sadly, they really don't know much about the entertainment business, because basically, in my opinion, as someone who has studied the entertainment industry for over 25 years, I basically believe that these guys wound up overpaying for all of those Warner Brothers assets. And yeah, you may own all those Warner Brothers assets, But the whole thing is that that whole mountain and catalog of movies, TV shows, and other assorted media were basically depreciating assets, and as depreciating assets, they basically were losing their value. And they were losing their value because when it comes down to entertainment media in pop culture is extremely fluid, and what was popular with one generation will not be popular with another generation. And the big problem for when it comes down to Paramount Skydance is that when it comes down to the Gen Z and Generation Alpha, the window for reaching them has basically been lost, and it was lost because many of these companies basically got caught up in what many called being woke. But I don't call it being woke, it's just that they hired a lot of inexperienced people who really didn't know what entertainment was, and they wound up making a lot of material that wound up alienating customers. And as they were alienating many of these older customers, they wound up going out here and missing out on the window to reach the young Gen Z and Generation Alpha customers who basically migrated over to a new form of media on their cell phones. And this is exacerbated by the situation when it came down to these rich oligarchs looking to try to control television, because back in 2009, these same oligarchs basically went out here and looked to try to force people into buying HD TVs by making the analog TV signals go digital. And as they looked to make the analog TV signals go digital, what really happened was people didn't go out here and buy HD TVs. No, they didn't go out here and buy those TVs. No, the younger people basically just migrated over to the internet to watch guys like myself on YouTube and basically abandoned television. And as they abandoned television, what happened with the HD TV and the ASTC television they were trying to push was it wound up basically collapsing. It collapsed because what happened was many of the older people, they would watch TV, and even worse, they created even more channels, because originally it was a 500 channel universe, but then they basically expanded it into thousands of channels with many sub channels. And as they expanded it into these sub channels, they basically started eating and encroaching on their own territory and wound up splitting their little remaining audience from the older people, while the young people moved over to the internet. And that really started the complete decline of the entertainment industry. And that whole situation got even worse as we went into the 2010s and the so-called woke era, where many of these companies were looking to push many of these old depreciating franchises to new audiences who basically these were not their characters or their pop culture. And because it wasn't their characters or their pop culture, many of those Gen Z and Generation Alpha kids basically started to tune out and further go to the internet. And as they went further to the internet, you had many of these YouTube grifters talking about how there was some sort of culture war, but there really wasn't a culture war. What was happening is that the audience was leaving, and that's the fact that flies over Larry Ellison's head. The audience has basically moved on, and you're out here with a bunch of depreciating assets that basically have lost their value in this 21st century, because what you're trying to do is sell 20th century franchises and 20th century characters to a 21st century audience, and that 21st century audience wants a completely different product. But sadly, when it comes down to the Ellisons and many in Hollywood, they don't understand that you again missed the window for reaching the 21st century the customer with pop culture. And now they're thinking that they're going to again win this culture war and get control over the entertainment industry, when again the only thing they've got is a group of depreciating assets that are losing their value as we speak. And they overpaid for those assets, and as they overpaid for those depreciating assets, they are basically stuck with a bunch of debt. So when I look at this deal that the Ellisons basically think they are over the moon over, they may realize that later on they basically again already have a burning house, and they've now bought another burning house. And what may happen is that their entire empire may just burn to the ground, because when it comes down to these guys, they're sitting there thinking, hey, we're going to make a Star Trek movie in 2028. But the problem is that many of the Gen Z and Generation Alpha could care less about Star Trek the same way they don't care about Star Wars, because that's not their pop culture, that's not their characters, that's not their story, and not the world they live in. So they basically have checked out, and these computer nerds basically are again stuck with a bunch of depreciating assets in a burning house that they overpaid for and are bogged down in debt. So basically Netflix may have wound up dodging a bullet as related to this whole situation. They may have wound up dodging a bullet long term, while the Ellisons, who are sitting here thinking that they saved the theater business, but they really haven't saved the theater business, because one, they know nothing about making movies or television shows. No, they don't really know about what the audience really likes today. No, they're sitting here thinking, oh, I'm going to make this kind of middle American conservative content. But the problem is that many of Gen Z and Gen Alpha live in a completely different world than the world many people who consumed entertainment in the 20th century did. And much of today's media, nobody's really making media that really appeals to kids from the Generation Alpha or the young adults of Gen Z. And because they're not making media that appeals to many of the Generation Alpha and Gen Z out there, basically again missing that window, you've lost the audience at this point as related to programming, and that's a domino effect. It's a domino effect because when you lose one generation and they start adopting new habits, you wind up losing the next generation of kids that they're having. And again, the birth rates for those kids is lower because many of those kids can't get that entry-level job and basically can't start their life, similar to what happened to many of us Gen Xers due to the crazy and unrealistic standards many of these companies have for qualifications. Many people can't really enter into the job market to get their life started, and as a result, this has caused a bottleneck as related to American life, where we have a cost of living crisis, because when the young can't come in, the old basically, again, are hoarding up a bunch of money and a bunch of assets, similar to what David Ellison and Larry Ellison have done. They basically are hoarding up a bunch of assets as related to entertainment, not understanding, again, these assets are depreciating assets because they're the pop culture of another century. They're the pop culture of another era. And that media only has historical value. It doesn't have economic value long term. No, when it comes down to those kids, something like the Marvel Cinematic Universe or many franchises like Star Trek or Alien or Predator or many of these other franchises like many of these films like Scream, again, those are old movies to them. And as they are old movies to them, the way movies like Durango Kid and Hopalong Cassidy, those westerns, that's old content for a Gen Xer like myself. Stuff like The Lone Ranger and Little Orphan Annie, that's old stuff for me. It's great in a historical context, but to watch it today compared to what I'm seeing now, basically it's old material. But this is, again, a point that flies over the head of Larry and David Ellison as they're caught up in their greed, thinking they're going to build a media empire. They're building a media empire based on depreciating assets that are crumbling as we speak. because when it comes down to Hollywood and pop culture have always been fluid, and they've always been focused on the young, and they've always been focused on making things for the current generation and focused on youth. But today's Hollywood is always focused on baby boomers and Gen Xers and making material for them. And if you're making material for baby boomers and Gen Xers, you're already way behind the curve, because the window right now is millennial nostalgia. Millennials are basically 40 years old, and you basically make material that's nostalgic for them, but they've missed out on that window as well, just catering to baby boomers and Gen Xers. And as a result, Hollywood basically is in this state of decline, because most of the folks in Hollywood really don't want to, again, give up, who are older, don't want to give up their power. And these computer nerds basically are remembering nostalgia that was popular to many Gen Xers and many baby boomers, not understanding, again, you need, and when you're in the entertainment business, you always have to keep making fresh, new content to appeal to the young generation. That's how you make most of your money, because young people are what the business makes its money on. Basically, when it comes down to the entertainment business, most of your money is made on people from about 8 or 9 years old all the way up to about 25 years old. That's where you make most of your money, because they are the ones who, one, buy the toys. They're the ones who these days buy the apps. They're the ones who want to watch the streaming shows. And again, with Paramount Skydance, they missed out on windows, like with movies like Transformers 1. I mean, the Ellisons were so incompetent, they released this movie in September, and I just looked at that and I shook my head. I said, you don't release a kid's movie in September. You release a kid's movie either in November, or you release it during the summertime, because that's when kids are out of school. You usually release a movie like a Transformers 1 during the summertime when the kids are out of school, and so you can have something to watch, or you release it during the Christmas and Thanksgiving holiday so that the kids can have something to watch. And again, that shows the incompetence of Larry and David Ellison, a pair of computer nerds who basically think they're going to build a media empire, but don't know that they're in a burning house of crumbling media assets, and basically are possibly putting the nail in the coffin for their digital counterparts like Netflix and Amazon to basically scoop all of this up for pennies on the dollar, similar to what Hostess did. What McKee Foods did to Hostess Foods. McKee Foods basically played the waiting game and said, hey, we'll wait for those Hostess assets to hit bankruptcy court, and we're not going to have to absorb any of that debt, because the debt would be canceled. And with the debt canceled, we can get these assets for pennies on the dollar, because they played the long game and didn't play the short game. And while many of the YouTube grifters are celebrating this as some sort of win of the culture war, it basically is me seeing that they really don't understand the business of entertainment, because Paramount Skydance didn't win the culture war. They just went out here and opened the door for the complete collapse of 20th century American media, and the complete collapse of the entertainment industry overall. Now, if you want to check out some of my books on the SJS Direct imprint, you can find those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format, and you can also find them at other online bookstores like Draft the Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you'd like to see me take the entertainment industry to the barbecue, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and Kindle, All About Marilyn. Learn all about the struggles of a faded former teen sitcom star in this absolutely fabulous 5-star screenplay. Get All About Marilyn in paperback and Kindle on Amazon.com today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, The Temptation of John Haynes. Give in to temptation and pick up this action-packed African-American paranormal romance. Get The Temptation of John Haynes in paperback and e-readers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.